The night my grandmother died, my aunt smiled. Not openly, not in a way anyone else would notice, but I noticed. I have always noticed the things other people miss. My name is Layla. I am 32 years old. And for most of my life, I have been the grandchild who sat at my grandmother's feet while everyone else sat at the table. Let me explain what I mean. My grandmother, Nanny John, we called her, was the kind of woman who filled a room without trying. Small in height, large in presence. She had built a small tailoring business from nothing after my grandfather died young, raised 4 children alone, and by the time I was born had become the quiet center of gravity around which our entire family orbited. She had 4 children. My mother was the youngest, and in our family, being the youngest meant being last for everything. I remember a specific evening when I was 9 years old, a family dinner at Nanny John's house. The table was full, aunts, uncles, cousins, loud conversations overlapping each other. My mother had spent the entire afternoon cooking. She had brought 3 dishes, set the table, arranged everything carefully. When everyone sat down, Aunt Mira looked at the food and said loudly, casually, like it cost her nothing, "Next time we should just order from a restaurant. It would be easier." The table laughed, my mother smiled. I watched Nanny John's face from across the room. She did not laugh. She looked at my mother just for a moment. A look I did not fully understand at 9 years old. I understand it now. She was watching, she was recording, she was filing it away in a place where it would matter later. My mother married a school teacher. Modest income, modest house, modest life, but a warm one. She never complained about money. She never asked Nanny John for anything. She showed up every Friday for dinner, brought food she had cooked herself, helped clean up afterward, and left quietly without asking for recognition. My aunts and uncles were different. Aunt Mira had married into money early and spent 30 years making sure everyone knew it. She sat at the head of every family dinner as if the seat had been assigned to her by law. She made decisions about family events without consulting anyone. She spoke about my mother's house the way people speak about places they feel sorry for. My Uncle Tariq, the eldest son, deferred to Aunt Mira in everything. He had opinions only when Aunt Mira had them first. He showed up for occasions where being present meant being seen and disappeared when there was actual work. My Uncle Hassan was quieter. He was not unkind, but he was weak in the specific way that allows unkind people to operate. He never objected to anything. I watched all of this from childhood. I stored it away. The way Nanny John had taught me to store things, quietly, carefully, without showing your hand. Because Nanny John and I had a specific kind of relationship that nobody else in the family quite understood. From the time I was 7, she would let me sit with her in her sewing room while she worked. Small room, smell of thread and fabric, and the particular biscuits she always kept on the side table. She would sew and I would do my homework and we would talk, really talk, the way adults talk, about things that mattered. She never treated me like a child who needed protection from reality. She treated me like someone who needed to understand it. She would say things slowly, carefully, like she was sewing them into me the same way she sewed fabric. "Layla, the people who show up when there is nothing to gain are the only ones worth trusting. A family is not the people who share your blood. It is the people who share your time. Everything gets recorded eventually, by someone, in some way." I thought she was being philosophical. She was giving me instructions. I grew up and moved to a city 3 hours away. I became a legal document analyst. I spend my days reading contracts, identifying hidden language, understanding what documents actually say beneath what they appear to say. Precise work, invisible work. The kind of work that teaches you that the most important things are always buried beneath the surface. I came home every month without fail. 3 hours each way. I brought Nanny John her specific thread, her biscuits, fresh flowers for her window table. My aunts and uncles came for Eid, for weddings, for moments where presence meant visibility. My mother came every Friday. I came every month. Nanny John never made a performance of it. She simply opened the door, took my face in both hands the way she always had, and said, "Ah, gay Mary Layla." You came, my Layla, every single time, for 7 years. Then 8 months ago, Nanny John got sick. When the family found out she was ill, something changed immediately. Aunt Mira began visiting every week. Uncle Tariq started calling daily. Uncle Hassan appeared on weekends with fruit baskets and loud concern. Cousins who had not come in years suddenly remembered where Nanny John lived. The house that had been quiet became crowded and performative. I watched this and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not surprise, recognition. One evening I arrived for my monthly visit and found Aunt Mira already there sitting very close to Nanny John, speaking in a low, warm voice about the family home, how it held so many memories, how it should stay in the family properly, how she personally would make sure everything was handled correctly when the time came. Nanny John listened without expression. When Aunt Mira left that evening, Nanny John looked at me across the room. She said nothing, but the look said everything. 6 months ago on a Tuesday when the house was empty and quiet, Nanny John asked me to sit with her. She was in her bed by then, small against the pillows, but her eyes completely, entirely clear. She held my hand for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "Layla, there is a blue envelope in the left drawer of my sewing table, behind the thread boxes. Do not touch it until I am gone. Do not tell anyone it exists. And when the time comes, read every word carefully." I said, "Nanny John," she squeezed my hand. She said, "You are the only one who reads carefully." I did not ask anything more. I drove home 3 hours and I did not sleep that night. I thought about everything she had ever said in that sewing room. Everything gets recorded eventually. By someone. In some way. 2 months later, Nanny John passed away quietly in the early morning. By the time I arrived, Aunt Mira was already there, already seated in Nanny John's chair, already talking about arrangements, already using the word estate like it was a word she had been waiting to use. That evening, the family sat together. Aunt Mira said, "I'll be handling Nanny's estate." She always said she wanted me to. Uncle Tariq nodded immediately. Uncle Hassan looked at the floor and said nothing. My mother sat very still. I said nothing either, but I watched Uncle Tariq's face when Aunt Mira said it, the way he relaxed, the way his shoulders came down slightly, like a decision had been made that benefited him, and he was relieved it had been made so easily. That expression told me everything I needed to know about what was coming. That night after everyone slept, I went to the sewing room. I moved the thread boxes. I found the blue envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, 4 pages. Nanny John's small, careful handwriting, the exact same handwriting that had been on my birthday cards my entire life. I sat on the floor of that sewing room and I read every word 3 times. Then I sat without moving for a very long time, because what I was holding was not just a letter. It was a legally valid handwritten will. I knew from my work that in our jurisdiction a handwritten will, entirely written and signed by the person, clearly dated, is legally binding without witnesses or attorneys, just the person's own hand and their clear intention. Nanny John had known this too. She had written every word herself, carefully, clearly, in the same precise way she had sewn fabric her entire life. Her house, the family home that Aunt Mira had already begun treating as a future asset, was to go to my mother, entirely, not split, not divided. To my mother, her savings, 30 years of careful accumulation, were to be divided equally between her 4 children. And to me personally, she had left the sewing room and everything in it, her machine, her fabrics, her tools. And inside the blue envelope was a smaller envelope with my name on it. Inside the smaller envelope was a fixed deposit certificate, in my name, matured, significant, something she had been quietly building for years without telling anyone. There was a small note with it. It said, "For Layla, who always came." I held that note for a long time. Then I stood up, put everything back in the envelope and went to my car. I drove 3 hours home. I did not tell my mother, not yet. I needed to be ready first. I spent 3 full days at my office building my file, photographing every page, researching every relevant law, verifying validity requirements, documenting the chain of custody, how I had received the envelope, when, under what circumstances. I did it the way I do everything, completely, carefully, without leaving gaps. Then I called an estate attorney, not a family connection, a specialist with no ties to anyone we knew. She reviewed the will for 2 hours in complete silence. Then she looked up and said, "This is valid, this is unambiguous, and if anyone contests it, they will not succeed." I said, "Someone will contest it." She said, "Then we will be ready before they start." 1 week after Nanny John's passing, Aunt Mira called a family meeting. She arrived with a printed document, a clean, formal-looking asset division plan. Equal split between the 4 children, house to be sold, proceeds divided, no mention of any will, no mention of my mother receiving anything different. She presented it with the confidence of someone who has already decided the outcome and is now simply performing the announcement. Uncle Tariq had clearly seen it in advance. He sat forward in his chair with the posture of someone ready to agree. Uncle Hassan held his tea with both hands and looked at nothing in particular. My mother sat quietly. She had spent a lifetime being quiet in rooms where Aunt Mira was speaking. Old habit, old pattern. Aunt Mira finished presenting. She looked around the table. "I think this is the fairest way," she said. "Nanny would have wanted equal." I let 1 full second pass, then I placed 4 photocopied pages on the table. The room went completely still, not the polite still of people pausing. The specific still of people who have just realized the ground beneath them has shifted. Aunt Mira looked at the papers, then at me. That expression, a door closing behind someone's eyes. She said, "Where did you get this?" I said, "Nanny John gave it to me." She said, "That is not a real will." I said, "My attorney disagrees." Uncle Tariq leaned forward and looked at the pages. His face changed in a way that was almost interesting to watch, the relaxed shoulders from a week ago now very tight. He said, "This can't be legal. There are no witnesses." I said, "Handwritten wills do not require witnesses in our jurisdiction. I have the legal documentation confirming validity if you would like to see it." Silence. Uncle Hassan put down his tea. He looked at the will. He read it slowly. Then he looked at my mother, and he said quietly to no one in particular, "She left the house to Rania." Rania is my mother's name. It was the first time in that entire meeting that my mother's name had been said out loud. My mother looked up. Her eyes filled. She did not cry. She pressed her lips together and looked back down at her hands. But I saw it. And I think Uncle Hassan saw it too, because something shifted in his face. He did not say anything else, but he did not support Aunt Mira either. What followed was 3 weeks of exactly what my attorney and I had prepared for. Aunt Mira consulted her own lawyer. Her lawyer reviewed the document. Her lawyer told her the same thing my attorney had told me. Valid, clear, uncontestable. Uncle Tariq made one more attempt, a phone call to me, very calm, very reasonable sounding, suggesting that perhaps we could find a compromise that honored Nanny John's spirit while being fair to everyone. I said, "The will is Nanny John's spirit. She wrote every word herself." He had nothing to say to that. On a Thursday morning 6 weeks after Nanny John passed, my mother received the transfer documents for the house. I drove 3 hours to be there. I did not tell her I was coming. I wanted to see her face when she opened the door and found me standing there. She opened the door. She looked at me. She looked at the envelope in my hand. She said, "Layla," I said, "come outside for a minute." We stood on the front step of the house she had grown up in, the house her mother had built from nothing, the house she had come to every Friday for 30 years. I gave her the envelope. She opened it slowly. She read the transfer document once, then again. Then she pressed the papers against her chest and she cried, not from grief, from something older than grief, the specific feeling of being seen by someone who is no longer there to see you. She said, she remembered. I said, she always remembered. She just waited for the right moment. My mother looked at me. She said, "How did you know what to do?" I said, "She taught me. She spent 30 years watching who showed up. I spent 3 weeks making sure it counted." My mother pulled me close. We stood there for a long time. The house behind us smelled like thread and old wood and the specific biscuits nobody else knew to bring. It smelled like every Friday dinner. It smelled like 30 years of quiet, faithful love that had never once asked to be noticed, and had been noticed anyway by the one person whose notice mattered most. My mother walked inside. I stood at the door. I thought about the blue envelope behind the thread boxes. I thought about Aunt Mira's face when I placed those pages on the table. I thought about Uncle Hassan saying my mother's name out loud, quietly, like he was remembering something he should not have forgotten. I thought about a 9-year-old girl doing homework on the floor of a sewing room while her grandmother sewed and talked about things that mattered. Everything gets recorded eventually. By someone. In some way. Yes, Nanny John, you recorded everything. In thread. In time. In 4 handwritten pages behind a box of blue thread. And when it was time, your handwriting did not forget. Your handwriting did not soften. Your handwriting simply waited patient and permanent and exact for someone to finally open the drawer. Ah, gay Mary Layla. You came, my Layla. Nanny John, I always came. And so did you.